Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Prospectives webinar brought to you by the Global Ag Tech Initiative at Meister Media Worldwide and our Global Ag Tech Alliance. I'm Heather Tunstall. I'm the co-chair of the Global Ag Tech Initiative and corporate content director with Meister Media Worldwide. And for those of you who are not familiar with the program, the Global Ag Tech Initiative's mission is to be the catalyst for connecting, engaging, and fostering dialogue in a global food production with technology as the foundation. We bring together a community of individuals and organizations dedicated to advancing technology solutions to create sustainable and socially responsible food production, meeting the needs of a growing population. And our Global Ag Tech Alliance is a group of organizations that help drive our purpose through thought leadership, advisory, and collaboration. One of those wonderful organizations is MentorMate, and Jen Williams, design principal at MentorMate, is our guest speaker for today's webinar on human-centered design. Jen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, and just a few quick housekeeping items I'd like to point out before we get started. For those of you in attendance, please feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to send messages to the whole group or to select people within the group. And then when chatting with the whole group, gotta say it, we kindly ask you to stay focused, on topic, professional, and polite. And if you have a question for Jen or for myself, please drop that in the Q&A function. That's a separate button at the bottom of your screen. We'll read it during our audience Q&A segment at the end of our presentation. And any questions that we don't get to, if we run out of time, there's no problem. Please include them in that Q&A box, and we'll ask Jen to help answer them in a follow-up article. That'll be posted on globalagtechinitiative.com along with a recording of this webinar. And then before we get into our main topic for today, Jen, would you like to share a little bit about yourself and your role at MentorMate as well as MentorMate as a whole?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So MentorMate is a digital consultancy. We help companies of all shapes and sizes solve business problems that need technology as part of that solution. And in my role at MentorMate, I lead out on projects where I come in on a client engagement at the front end and really help the client clarify or hone the problem that they're really trying to solve. And then I help the project team understand the business need and the user need and really craft a solution, a digital solution that meets the needs of both of those audiences while still taking into consideration technical constraints and all that good stuff. So it's a really fun job.
It sounds like it, and a very important one. And that's exactly what we're going to get into today and why you're our expert speaker here. So let's set the stage a bit for that deeper conversation on human-centered design. It all starts with the recognition that historically, and as a highly generalized statement, ag tech has struggled with adoption. This isn't a surprise to anyone, I don't believe. But in your opinion, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of reasons for it. Obviously, data and kind of data integrity and data hygiene is one big piece that I know lots of work is underway in ag and ag tech to really solve for that. Another piece of it is, integration and interoperability. So single point solutions have proven to not really be the modality that producers want to adopt tech. They don't want sort of one thing that addresses something here and then another thing that addresses something over here. Something that's much more unified and integrated is really what I think the industry has come to realize is needed. And then, honestly, there are definitely a lot of solutions out there that maybe have a really good business problem they're trying to solve, but that come up a little bit short when it comes to meeting the needs of the producers who, that they're designed for and that really need to adopt the technology. And so that's where I come in, which we're going to talk about more over the course of the next several minutes.
Absolutely. And it's, like you said, it's a multi-pronged kind of situation, complex. And we in the Global Ag Tech Initiative often talk about ways that we can support growers in incorporating technologies that help them be more successful. And we've talked about using data to inform decisions. We've talked a lot about collaboration, as you mentioned, and integration and so on and so forth. One thing that I think perhaps is often overlooked and, that we haven't discussed as much is that design process. And that's really at the core of a lot of these technologies, right? And as an industry, how we approach it. So that brings me to the meat of our webinar today. what exactly is human-centered design, and how
Mhm.
does it differ from other design methods?
Yeah. So human-centered design. So first of all, I want to say when I say design, I don't just mean kind of colors and fonts. I mean really what how has something been put together, to make it useful and intuitive and usable for whoever it's being delivered to, or whoever is the target audience. And so human-centered design takes as its fundamental premise that folks like me who are in the business of building, designing and building custom software solutions don't do that, what we say, kind of in a conference room, right, or in the office. You really take to heart the idea that you need to understand who you're building it for and what their contexts are, what their needs are, what their kind of assumptions and operating principles are. And that needs to be part of what you're considering as you are designing a digital solution for something. If you're just designing it based on assumptions or based on kind of what the business thinks the problem is, that's only part of the story. And to really make sure it's going to work for the humans who need to use it, you kind of put them in the center of your design process, and the work that you do up front before you start building the thing to really understand who is going to use it and what they need.
And, that's a good point. When we think about designing for humans and we think about
Mhm.
designing for what they need, how do you do that research? How do you understand what it is that
Yeah,
they need?
absolutely. I mean, that really truly means going where the users are and going into the contexts where they're going to be using the technology that you are making for them. So, in the case of building an ag tech solution, that would mean going into the field with the producers or the growers and watching them do the work that they would be utilizing the solution that I'm tasked with designing, and not just saying, well, would you like this or how would you use this, but really watching them work and understanding that kind of at a fundamental level and asking a lot of questions about that, what we call this broader context, and then taking that into consideration when identifying the features that a particular digital solution should have, and when thinking about how to package those features up into an app or a platform, or you name it, into something that's really going to work for folks. So really core to human-centered design, as opposed to kind of design that doesn't have the human-centered adjective attached to it, is this idea that you take seriously the need to understand and get very deeply familiar with who's using the thing that you're making and where they're using it, and really kind of what that context is.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm wondering too, like, what does it look like when you compare a design that was clearly made with the business in mind as opposed
Yep.
to the
Yep.
human in mind? Can you
Mhm.
give us an idea of kind of what that looks like? What are the
Sure.
discrepancies between the two?
Yeah, and I want to be clear. It's not that solving for business needs is not part of the equation. It's just we got to do both, right?
Right.
So the way that I like to make it really tangible, is, if you have ever used a piece of technology that just did not make sense, made it really hard for you, the person who came to use it, to get something, for some very practical kind of purpose, and you really struggled to do that, that meant that your needs weren't taken into consideration. It probably meant that the business was like, what are the things we need this to do? And the kind of technology arm of that org, either their in-house technology arm, or if they hired a company like mine to help them build it, sort of said, well, what business do you need? Great, let's sort of put that up, let's put that together and make a tool. And so that's a really simplistic way of explaining it, but that really is what it comes down to, is that there wasn't kind of equal consideration given to both of those needs at the front end, to really understand and define the problem. And then kind of after you'd done some design work, testing what your designs were before you went and wrote them in code, if you will, and put them out into the wild for use.
Okay. What's that test process look like? Is there a feedback loop, or how do you
Mhm.
incorporate some of that human-centered design
Yep.
based on what your test subjects have done?
Yeah. So you mean after we've done some design work and then I've
Yeah,
tested
yeah.
it. So we literally build prototypes in the land of digital software. That means using a computer program to design screens and then linking those screens together to kind of make something that looks and feels like the real thing, but isn't the true real thing. And then, and this is a large part of my job, recruiting test subjects and having them work with that prototype and asking them a series of questions, having them complete a series of tasks and seeing where it's easy and seeing where they really struggle or they say, this doesn't make any sense to me. I don't get this. I would, this wouldn't let me do X, Y, and Z because of A, B, and C. And then we iterate. Right. And then we say, oh, gosh, we learned a bunch of stuff. Let's make some changes. And we do that, if I'm designing something net new, we do that at the beginning, before we launch the MVP, the minimum viable product. But, ideally, we don't just do it that one time. We continually kind of test and iterate, both with usability testing, what I just described, and then also by looking at analytics and paying attention to inbound customer questions, customer feedback, into customer support and that sort of thing. We're looking at that kind of entirety of that data set and using that to inform how we evolve the product, be it by adding new features or fixing stuff that just isn't working in the way that, the folks who are using it need it to work.
And that's amazing right there, because I know that's a common topic that we discuss both at our Vision conference and then just in general at Global Ag Tech Initiative is the concept of bringing tech to agriculture instead of ag to tech and getting the voice of the user incorporated in the design of the technology, right? So this is that in action. That is exactly what we're talking about. We're having the users come to you and say, here's what we need, here's how we need it, here's how we use it, and then testing that. So I think that's that's so important to understand just that nuance there in the design process to truly have the user's voice be heard. So I appreciate that. So you talked a little bit about design doesn't necessarily mean fonts and colors and the aesthetics of something. So what are some of these other common misconceptions surrounding the design process?
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, when they think design, they think make it pretty. And I don't, that sounds a little more tongue in cheek than I actually mean, but most of us, we think design is roughly equivalent to graphic design or illustration, or I don't know, what the artsy kid that sat next to us in high school doodled on the side of their paper that looks really cool that we couldn't do. And it is that, but there's a lot more to it. And so, when I think about it, I think about the process of building a house. You don't just work with an interior designer. If you do, you don't have a house. You have a mood board that has wallpaper swatches and paint colors on it. But before you get to that, you got to start all the way back with the architect and the general contractor talking to you about what you need and then drawing up blueprints based on what you described that you need. And then that's kind of my job, right? Is to do the blueprints. And then an interior designer, kind of the visual designer, comes in and looks at those blueprints and imagines what it should look like, kind of rendered in 3D with, paint and wallpaper and flooring and molding and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of the fonts and colors piece, but those two things need to both happen. If you just do the latter, you don't have a house, right? And oh, by the way, in my metaphor here, the general contractor and all the workers, they're the engineers, the software engineers who build the code, but you need all three of those. And so when I say design, I'm talking about the architectural blueprints and the interior design being kind of thought through mindfully based on the needs of users. And then frankly, working with software developers to make sure they understand the intention there and they render that in code in a way that, at the end of the kind of that pipeline, you get a really good app or platform as opposed to one that's kind of junk. Yeah.
Junk, but pretty.
Yeah. There's a lot of really pretty junk out there and you start to use it and you're like, this looks great. It doesn't work so well. I cannot do the very simple thing I want to do. Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. Okay. Do you have any examples you'd like to share that highlight an operation that has found success using technology design with in mind?
Yep. MentorMate's been in business for 20 years and we do a lot of work in ag tech. We also do a lot of work in healthcare, financial services. some public sector work. And I went and kind of surveyed my entire organization. And I said, give me some examples of ag tech projects where we've really led with design. And what I got back, and this was kind of my hunch, but I wanted to validate it with, a cross section of my colleagues, was, ag tech is just coming to this point where the idea of really investing in a human-centered design process is starting to be recognized as part of a need, or, kind of an imperative. And so what I heard was like, yep, we're just starting to have conversations with ag tech companies where they're not just like, yeah, write me some code to do this thing, but also like, we really want to make sure that we're delivering like a modern, experience that folks can use. And so I think that to me, I've been doing this work for a long time. That is where healthcare and financial services were about a decade ago. And it's completely typical in terms of the kind of life cycle of an industry in kind of this era of digital transformation is, they start by saying, we got to get better tech. We got to really modernize our code base. And then eventually they realize that's not quite enough. We have to address, our data structures and architecture. We've got to address interoperability. We've got to address kind of the user experience of stuff. And so that's right where ag tech is, that's where the industry is really starting to grapple with those kind of next level considerations when it comes to putting good digital product out in the marketplace.
Okay, so you say we're right on the cusp then.
Absolutely, you're right where you should be. You're not really, you're following that well documented. I didn't invent it. Well documented kind of digital transformation journey.
All right, we're doing it right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So one of the things that we often hear about would be labor shortages, right? Constantly. And capability gaps within a growing operation, particularly as they're starting to bring on new technologies and training and things like that. So what advice do you have for those who are interested in adopting new technologies, but they don't know how to manage it in-house?
Yeah, I think the easy answer is it doesn't make sense for all companies to build a really big, robust technology function in-house. For some, it does. For others, it doesn't. And so that's where I think this whole do we try to build something ourselves? Do we work with a strategic technology partner to do that? Do we buy something off the shelf? It really is kind of I would say, start with the question of what do you need to do, and then go through the process of evaluating, do we really need to kind of build up our technology function in our organization, or do we want to outsource that? And a lot of times, and obviously I'm biased because I work on the vendor side, but, what you get when working with a vendor is you are kind of buying the expertise that they have accrued as opposed to trying to build it from scratch yourself. And so in a lot of instances, that is the way to get, your technology function or your kind of digital transformation really accelerated much more quickly than you can in-house. Doesn't mean you wouldn't ever need any kind of, CIO or CTO and some, some tech in-house, but it will definitely kind of minimize the amount that you have to carry in terms of overhead. So it can be a really good solution.
Right, right. And we also talk a lot about the time it takes, right? So
yes,
hours are so vital when it comes to growing operations, and taking the time to train up can be a long-term commitment and stuff. So sometimes even if it's just the beginning, having that extra support is wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Jen, I'm going to leave the last one as an open question for you. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience about human-centered design specifically and the acceleration of tech adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think, somebody a really long time ago, kind of off the cuff, said to me, software is soft, hardware is hard. And I think there's a lot of hardware in agriculture, right? I mean, there's a lot of implements, there's just a lot of that. And it can feel like, for hardware, the time it takes to develop a solution and test it, and the R&D there is just pretty lengthy. It's not that way in software. Software is soft. It's much easier to kind of iterate, put something out there, see how it performs, iterate and change it. Doesn't mean it doesn't take any time or investment, but I would just when I'm working with folks in an industry where there's a lot of hardware in play, I find that it's really useful to remind them that the kind of development cycle for software, for the technology, the software piece of that is just a lot faster. And so that's where it's like safer or less costly to do some experimentation and do some iteration. So that's, I think, something to keep in mind for all the folks in the audience.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay. And we do have some questions here. We're
Sure.
going to open up for any other participants, any audience members that would like to ask questions. Please do use that Q&A function there at the bottom. I'm going to read the ones that are in the chat first.
Sure.
Hi, Rodrigo from Symbiomics. Okay, greetings from Brazil. Nice to see you, Rodrigo. Jenkin Lee asks, what products and services in ag would you say have leveraged design well? Consumer tech design always looks up to Apple. Who does ag tech design look up to?
Yep. I mean, everybody always says we want to be the Apple, right? And it's like, well, billions of dollars have gone into Apple. So,
Right.
I think, Kubota has done some interesting stuff. There's, some sort of farm business management software. I'm sorry, I don't have the names right in front of me. I wish I had thought to jot those down. But I think the kind of farm management software space is a little bit further along than some of the technologies for, remote monitoring, that sort of thing. And so that is where I would look, and then for better or worse, some of the big players are starting to invest in that space, or invest in design, and they've just got the resources. They can sort of take that on at scale much more easily than some of the smaller players. Yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Jenkin Lee had another one. How does design work for farmers or growers or producers?
Yeah.
Differed for other types of other user types? Any design or usability themes and preferences have you seen being unique among ag users?
Yeah, I mean, this is such an obvious one, but I think, and this audience is going to know it, but I have to remind my colleagues, like a lot of technology is used outside, like outdoors, well, not always, but you cannot make the assumption that folks are always sitting at a desk, right? And so that is really important. And again, that is really obvious to this audience. I'm a farm kid. I grew up in rural Iowa, so it's obvious to me, but I have to really remind a lot of my colleagues who are not farm kids, like, stuff just gets like worn. And, it's not your sort of climate controlled conditions that folks are using this tech in. So that I think is always a consideration that I like to call out, not just for ag tech, obviously any kind of sort of heavy industry construction has the same sort of considerations, but still important to keep in mind for folks like us. I think, and this isn't going to be new to this audience either, but has been proven, both it makes intuitive sense, but also has been proven through research. Like there's just a lot of there's not an automatic trust that you're granted as an ag tech, purveyor, if you will. You got to kind of earn that. And I think that isn't wholly unique to producers, but I do think that there's an ethic among producers of like, buy from people buy from people you have a relationship with, that feels real to me, and not just feels. Data has really borne that out. But I think, trust is something that as a designer I constantly think about, because it is so much like if I lose my users' trust in the product I'm designing because of a few bad interactions or a few kind of, dead ends, as we call them. It's way harder to earn it back once I've lost it. And so, I think that goes extra for this particular audience because of that, the relationship that they often have with, their local agronomist or, whoever else. It's very much an industry that's built on relationships in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. It completely is. And I I think that speaks to what you mentioned before about that feedback loop and the testing and talking to people and understanding their needs. That builds trust as itself, but then
Mhm,
listening to
mhm.
them and making those iterations,
Yes,
that
yes,
also reinforces that. So,
absolutely.
Alejandra Escoto submitted a Q&A question. Each farming operation is different. To what extent are proprietary solutions acceptable? And when is it better to dive in and
Mhm.
implement existing solutions and mold them? In that same
Yeah,
line, how far is it acceptable to adapt a solution to our own operations?
yeah, that is a really good question.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give a classic designer answer. It depends. But my profession is famous for giving that very very true but very annoying answer a lot of the times to questions. I think how you really got to get clear with yourself about what problems you have, what you really need a particular what problems you're trying to solve, and then really evaluate what's out there and ask yourself um, if it's going to give you a good enough solution to that problem, right? And sometimes it does, right? Sometimes it's like, this isn't perfect, but it is good enough to meet my needs, and I'm just gonna, buy the thing, off the
Mhm.
shelf, right? Um, Other times with some products, and this isn't really the case with everything, a product company or a software vendor is going to say, well, we can configure, i.e., we can help you adapt our tool to be really, not completely custom, but highly configured to meet your needs. That is sometimes true, but I would really caution, ask a lot of really probing, pointed questions to really assess what true, like what configuration really means for any particular software vendor. Um, and then sometimes it can make a lot of sense to invest in really putting together your own proprietary solution. I think you know obviously what scale you're operating at and whether the ROI is there is really something you've got to consider carefully, because it's not inexpensive to build custom software. But we do a lot in our, I'm involved in a lot of pre-sales and potential client conversations, and we really work to help a potential client assess what the ROI is on something, kind of what's the business case and what's the ROI, or what ROI do you need to realize to make this worth it. And so I think that's part of what I would encourage anybody to do. And frankly, anyone who's looking to work with a company like mine, that should be something that as a strategic partner, we are helping you really think through, right, about that ROI and how to assess that and how to calculate that.
That should be the bottom line conversation of just about any tech, right?
Absolutely.
What's the ROI?
Absolutely.
That's where it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Mhm.
We have a question from Gaston. How do you build a disruptive technology compared to an incremental advantage to an existing product? Example, a carbon
Mm.
neutral greenhouse that does not need fossil fuel for heating.
How do you build a disruptive technology? I mean, I think
Billion dollar
there's
question.
yeah, right. I'm like, great question. I think if you want to disrupt an industry, like, it's all well and good to want to disrupt an industry, and it's all well and good to sort of say, like, that's right for disruption, that's right for disruption. But the work to really ideate and generate a truly disruptive solution is a lot, and I would say, you know, I don't. I think in most cases, we meaning any of us, are unlikely to like have too many technologies that we really build that are truly disruptive. As that doesn't mean it can't happen, but I don't know that that should always be the goal unless you're really clear about what you're trying to disrupt, and you've got a solution that is disruptive that you've kind of confirmed will truly kind of move the needle in that really big way. And I guess the second part of that is, it's not bad to incrementally evolve a product either, right? Like that, not everything has to be this big disruptive solution. It's also okay to kind of incrementally evolve or improve something as well. So I think it kind of depends on what you're trying to do, which is the right route.
Right. And it also it brings up the question in my head too about adoption and familiar versus new, and
Yes.
sometimes friction when it comes to
Yeah.
brand new things that people don't quite understand yet
Yep.
versus,
Hmm.
hey, I know you know this, we've improved upon it.
Yep.
Again, not saying one's better than the other, but
Right.
there's that
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah. Right. I talk about and think a lot about my users' mental models. And you don't, and what I mean by that is sort of what concepts are operating in someone's headspace that I need to be aware of, so that ideally I'm trying to design something that adheres just the right amount, or diverges just the right amount from that mental model. But if you go too far away from a mental model, you're probably really going to struggle with adoption, right? And so, like, a good example of something that didn't go too far away from the mental model, but yet disrupted, is Uber and Lyft, right? They very much looked at the taxi industry and said, this is broken, we can do this better. But yet, they still sort of thought, well, people sometimes need rides. How do people, get cabs now? How can we push on that? And I would argue that they did disrupt, but they did it in a way that was very much cognizant of the mental models that were in place and didn't try to sort of throw those out the window, if you will. So it's a nuanced thing to think through. Yeah.
Great. We have a question from Fred in the Q&A. Do you incorporate utility incentives supporting energy efficient technologies into your products? Let me try that again.
Yeah.
Energy efficient technologies into your projects to drive down the ROI.
I'm going to say one likely should. I don't have an example that I can say conclusively that I've worked on where utility incentives have been part of the equation. But I would say, thinking through how those impact ROI is obviously really critical if those are in play in whatever project you've got going on.
Wonderful. All right. Does anybody else have any questions that you would like to ask Jen or myself about human-centered design, Global Ag Tech Initiative, or MentorMate? Or Jen, is there anything else that you would like to share?
No, this has been great. I love the engagement that the audience has had. It's been wonderful.
Yes, I love it. So if you do, any audience members, if you do have additional questions, please feel free to email me, htunstall@meistermedia.com. I'm happy to incorporate that in the wrap-up article. Again, this is being recorded. It will be posted on globalagtechinitiative.com with a article component to it and the full webinar itself. So please do feel free to email me if you have additional questions for Jen. Make sure that I pass them along to her for her expert answers. And Jen, thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Absolutely.
Real quick, what's MentorMate's website and how can they get a hold of you?
MentorMate.com. That is how they can get a hold of MentorMate, or I'm jen.williams@mentormate.com.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, for the Prospectives webinar series brought to you by the Global Ag Tech Initiative and the Global Ag Tech Alliance. Thank you, MentorMate, for being a member of our Global Ag Tech Alliance. If you'd like to learn more, please do visit us at globalagtechinitiative.com. Again, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks for joining.